Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. This is probably going to be my final video on this Olivetti M300-02, but I am the bearer of good news because it is fully operational now. So just a couple of days ago it was still in pieces on my desk here, but I finally got it up and running even after a cold boot. So that's going to be partly the topic of this video. But if you're interested in seeing more Olivetti M300 content, then Casual Retro Gamer has you covered. On his YouTube channel, he not only has lots of interesting content on Commodores and Amigas, but he also has an interesting 4-part series on this Olivetti M300. So I highly recommend checking that out. He does some cool things with it, like overclocking it, installing sound card, CD-ROM drive, and doing some fixes on the Olivettis. So I highly recommend you check out his channel. I'm going to be putting a link in the description of this video, and I'm also going to try and put up a card here in this video that should pop up right about now. So check out his channel, Casual Retro Gamer, really cool stuff. But now back to my experience with this little Olivetti. I was still focusing on these capacitors, and I found 3 additional capacitors here on this riser card. I thought about replacing those as well because, you never know. So I desoldered them here and then hooked up my ESR meter to analyze them, but they were like perfectly fine. Good ESR values. The capacitance reading was spot on, so no issues there. So I did decide to replace them anyway, but as I was kind of expecting, that didn't result in an improvement, so the thing was still rebooting here at the memory count, and as it was warming up it was resetting later on. So yeah, no change in that regard. But my obsession with capacitors didn't stop there, so here's another cringe-worthy moment for you guys where I remove this original SMD capacitor from the main board and replace it with a through-hole capacitor. Again, this didn't make any difference. So at that point I was pretty convinced that the capacitors weren't going to be an issue, not on the motherboard and not on the power supply. So I started to focus on the memory, and especially this memory stick here, which is soldered on the main board directly. So not that easy to replace. As you can see, it has 38 pins, so it's not a standard 30-pin SIM format. But one thing that I could do was to reflow the solder joints here on the main board. I noticed that the board was kind of flexing a little bit on that area, so there might be a cold solder joint over there. So I added some flux here and I kind of reflowed all of these connectors. But again, didn't make a difference, so the machine was still rebooting, especially on a cold boot. So yeah, that was kind of a bummer. But of course the issue could also be on the stick itself. So the SMD RAM chips that you see here might need to be reflowed also. So that's what I was going for next. So I decided to use my heat gun and kind of warm up the stick there a little bit, reflow some of the solder, and make sure that I also targeted the connectors of the RAM chip directly. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of me actually using the hot iron gun on the memory stick, and I was a bit reluctant if it would work. But when I left it off overnight and then I restarted it in the morning and I noticed that it was starting just fine, I knew that I was probably onto something. So ever since then the computer has booted without any issues. I haven't had the reset issue anymore, so not on cold starts and not while I was working with the PC. So I guess for the moment I can consider this problem solved. So just heating up the memory stick seemed to have solved it. So now I have a bunch of parts here laying on my desk. So next step will be to reassemble the entire thing. I'm not going to be recapping the power supply anymore, I think, because it seems to be working fine. I am going to be adding a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive just for look and feel kind of purposes. And yeah, time to put everything back together. And I wanted to take a look at this floppy disk drive here, the 1.44 megabyte disk drive, which seems pretty standard. But I had an issue with it because as I was trying to boot the PC from a floppy, I noticed that I couldn't enter the floppy in the damn thing. And what's even worse is that I cannot easily replace it, because when you compare it with a standard floppy drive, you can see the height difference here. So this is one of those slim models. So I decided to open her up and see what was wrong with it, and I could immediately see that this head assembly here was just blocking the disc. So not only was there a plastic bit broken off, which kind of should normally hold the head assembly in place, but I also noticed that on the head itself it was kind of bent completely, probably because somebody was trying to shove a disc into there with brute force, which obviously didn't work. And I initially thought about trying to fix it, but to be quite honest with you guys, I was kind of fed up with the machine and I just couldn't cope with a complex repair of this disk drive, because it was not only the head assembly that was broken, and the small square that actually holds the head was pretty bent, so it would be very difficult to align this again. And what I also noticed is that the motor wasn't spinning, so that was probably yet another issue with this disk drive. So at that point I just decided to give up and focus on assembling the thing back again, adding an additional disk drive, and hopefully find a replacement disk drive for this one. And if I'm really feeling motivated, perhaps do a separate video and see if I can fix it. Now, as everything was already laid out in individual parts on my desk, I decided to kind of blow off the cobwebs from this thing, making sure that it's nice and clean, doing the same thing with the case before I put everything back together again. So the goal right now is to assemble all the parts of this PC and put it back together again. I did add 2 megabytes of memory to add to the 2 megabytes which was soldered onto the main board. So I have these two 30-pin 1 megabyte RAM chips here that I can add to these SIM sockets, which will make the PC somewhat more usable. It is possible to upgrade it to 10 megabyte, but I don't have any 4 megabyte memory sticks. But 4 megabytes should be sufficient for this machine. And the PC immediately detected the additional RAM, so the total memory was set at 4096 kilobytes, which is correct. You do need to confirm the updated memory configuration in the BIOS, so we just hit enter to confirm, and then the PC will boot like it normally does. I also used memtest86, which I found a version that I could put on a floppy drive and just boot off that floppy and let it run. So it takes a fair amount of time, but it eventually does finish, and it didn't find any issues with the memory. And as a side note, just to run this PC without the whole power button assembly from the case, you need to bridge this brown wire here, which is kind of needs to be set logic high in order to enable the keyboard. And here's the 5 1/4 inch floppy drive that I'm going to be using for this build. This is a Panasonic 1.22 megabyte 5 1/4 inch floppy drive. It kind of matches the color scheme of the rest of the computer, so yeah, it will probably be a nice fit. So let's add the 3.5 inch disk drive, the 5 1/4 inch one, and for that we just need to attach some screws here at the bottom of the case. So yeah, this will give it a different look and feel, but I like the fact that you can also work with 5 1/4 inch floppy drives here. So let's add the hard drive here. Hook up the screws. Luckily they are rather easily accessible. Add the power supply unit. This is a bit of a tight fit because there's not a lot of room between the power supply and the hard drive. And on these small PCs, you really need to plan these things out. For example, adding the ribbon cables here to the floppy drives and the hard drive before adding in the power supply, because otherwise it's just virtually impossible to add these things afterwards. So that's what I've done here. So I've prepared all the ribbon cables here, and now we can go ahead and put the power supply back in. And of course we have this rather complex power button mechanism here that we need to attach to the power supply. You need to be very careful with it that you don't snap off one of these plastic thingies, otherwise this whole mechanism would be broken. So yeah, it's a bit fiddling around, but in the end I was able to hook it back together. Next thing we're going to be adding is the main board to the computer. Now, because of the space restrictions, it's best to hook up the IDE and the floppy drive cables before you add the motherboard. But at that point I hit a little roadblock because I wasn't able to get that ribbon cable in the IDE controller, and upon closer inspection I noticed that one of these pins here was blocked, and that this side of the IDE cable should in fact be hooked up to the hard drive. And that is typically something that you don't have with kind of regular PCs and clones, where you have a lot more room to work with, where you're not twisting yourselves in these tight spaces all of the time. So yeah, that's one drawback of using these kind of small branded PCs. But ultimately I got the motherboard into the case. Just need to align it back here, and then with one screw we can attach the motherboard to the case. At that point it's always interesting to do a small smoke test just to make sure that you didn't break anything, and to my horror I didn't get anything on the display, but luckily I also noticed that the LED of the floppy drive was lit continuously, so I knew this would be a cabling issue. And again, yeah, hooking up a cable in these tight spaces is not the most ideal thing to do, but luckily this was the only issue, and after that the machine was starting again. So I was planning to hook up a networking card and a sound card, but at this point, to be honest, I couldn't really be bothered with it. Again, I highly recommend you checking out Casual Retro Gamer's YouTube channel, who has done just that. But now I'm just going to be adding these little screws here on the back just to make sure that everything is tightened up. I'm going to be adding this little plastic ornament here. And then finally we still have this little assembly here that we need to put together, as this contains the hard drive LED and the PC speaker. So we just need to hook up the PC speaker to the thing. And then there's this little plastic thingy here that holds the PCB in place and also acts as kind of a standoff for the PC speaker. And then we can just attach the whole thing to the PC case. It attaches itself to the main board via the riser card using this ribbon connector. And as it was a nice sunny day, I decided to go outside and give the case a good cleaning as well, making it all nice and fresh. And it was a good excuse to get outside for a couple of minutes. So I'm just gonna leave this outside to dry for a little bit. It already looks a lot cleaner, so that's good. And then we can finish the build by putting the case cover back on, which requires a little bit of wiggling, but eventually goes on without too many issues. And here we have it. I think it looks really cool with the 5¼ inch floppy drive included. And it also makes it practical because at least we can load up some software on it. And speaking of software, it's always interesting to see what kind of stuff that you find on these old computers. And I'm not talking about data, but I'm actually talking about the games and the applications that you find on them. And just look at this beautiful tiled Windows background. and these funky colors here in Windows 3. It's kind of a joy to see this type of stuff. But let's go on the hard drive, set the keyboard layout to something non-Italian, and see what we have here. So, obviously, Prince of Persia needs to be on every retro computer. I think I can safely say that in about 80% of all of the cases, I find this game on 286, 386, or 486 based computers. Another game you often find on these old computers is Battle Chess, a game from 1988 by Interplay. Not much of a chess player myself, but it's always nice to see the Battle Chess playground being laid out here. And next up we have some poker. So perhaps not the type of poker that you would expect, but we have Artworks Strip Poker 2 here. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is how we did it in the early 90s. Just look at those high resolution graphics and excellent gameplay. And if that didn't get the juices flowing, just look at what I found here in the strip folder. Let's turn on the PC speaker. Want to get comment from the girls? Yes. And emotional pictures. Daily Sport. Cover Girl Strip Poker. We had a poker fan here on this PC, obviously. So let's start her up and just look at those high resolution graphics. And let's pick Sofia here, a good Italian name. And there she is, ladies and gentlemen. Again, unfortunately, I'm just as good at playing poker as I am in playing chess, so I'm going to be leaving it at that. But enough with those shenanigans. For the serious business users, we have Turbo antivirus software installed on the PC, allowing us to do a Disco Completo scan, checking all of the files on the hard drive for viruses. In the productivity department, we have Microsoft Works, the MS-DOS version. So this is always nice to see again, where you had basic spreadsheet functionality, database functionality, and word processing. And we also have some financially oriented software from the Ministerio de Económica y Hacienda, or the Ministry of Finance of Spain, I think. I can imagine that people were doing their tax returns on this kind of computer and software. Just look at this. And I wanted to finish off with some Monkey Island, but unfortunately the original owner decided to install an original legal version of Monkey Island, for which I do not have the copy protection, so I will have to leave it at that. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. The machine keeps on working. I've had it off for like 2 days and I flipped the switch and it turned on without any issues. I like the look and feel with the additional floppy drive, and overall it's a pretty nice looking machine with this IBM monitor. So I want to thank you guys for watching this little series. I am going to be leaving it at that for the moment. I have tons of other stuff that I need to get through. For example, this military laptop, which was kindly donated to me by Mr. Han Wen from Germany. I really hope I'm pronouncing that name right. I'm really looking forward to it. I've been procrastinating a little bit on it because I think it's a really cool looking machine, but at the same time I'm kind of scared that I won't get it up and running completely. But that being said, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment in the comment section below. Make sure to check out Casual Retro Gamer on YouTube for a bunch of cool videos that he does on Commodores, Amigas, and also this Olivetti M300. And for now, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Susie. So be safe, everybody, take care, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye-bye.